Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 2 of week 7 and it is in continuation of the lecture 1, that is the public-private dichotomy. First of all, we will understand more about the problematic of the public-private divide because in the lecture 1 we have already understood the meaning of the public-private dichotomy. After understanding this, then we will discuss in some detail the various implications of the slogan, that is, the personal is political. And finally, we will conclude our discussion. First of all, let us understand why the public private dichotomy is problematic. Now, in our earlier lecture, we have already understood that the political, economic sphere and any other activities which is done outside the domestic sphere is known as the public sphere, and the private sphere includes the work which is done inside the home or inside the domestic sphere. Now, Habermas suggests that protecting the rights of women and girls within the family or private sphere is crucial for maintaining the public sphere. So, basically in our earlier lecture, we have discussed the various aspects of the public private dichotomy, and we have seen that why there is need for the protection of rights in the public sphere and also in the private sphere, and why private sphere is political we have also understood about it. But there are certain problems in the public private dichotomy, and Habermas has mentioned that if we are talking in terms of public private dichotomy, then we have to think about protecting the rights of women and girls within the family and private sphere, so that we can ensure that they are also getting equal access in the public sphere. So, very important, and therefore, we have seen that private sphere and public sphere are related with each other, and the feminists have argued that they are in fact interdependent on each other. We cannot have a complete separation. Second is the distinction between public and private sphere poses challenges for those seeking change with government and state institutions, particularly in areas like work, education, policy and governance. So, if we are talking in terms of the separation of two spheres, then it is very difficult to talk about bringing about changes and transformation in the public sphere, whether it is in the case of the government or state institution, or whether it is in the areas of workplace or in the field of education or educational institutions or policy making bodies or governance structure. Everywhere, if we give primacy to the distinction of these two spheres or the division of labor, then how can we bring about changes which are sensitive to gender needs or which are against any gender biases and discrimination. Now, the third point is that within the household, men often dominate women, perpetuating inequality through mechanisms like domestic violence, abuse and rape. We have already seen that for a long period of time, because the private sphere was considered separate and an area of privacy which was considered very important for individual autonomy, so the state was not thought of appropriate, or it was not considered appropriate for the state to intervene in the activities of the private sphere, and therefore this sphere was not under scrutiny of the state, and we know that this area was also the area of domination of men over women, and various forms of mechanisms were undertaken to perpetuate this inequality, like the most common is the domestic violence, then rape, and then all types of other sexual abuse are a very commonplace things which have been taking place in the domestic sphere. Now, this division creates power imbalances between genders across various spheres, reinforcing gender institutions and practices. So, since there is power imbalances, so it also leads to gender biases or gender imbalances in the structures and institutions also. So, therefore, everything is linked with each other. The type of ideas and practices that we have in our everyday lives also influences our structures and institutions in the society. Now, the separation of public and private spheres with hierarchical relations perpetuated gender institutions and practices, hindering progress. Now, it has hindered progress because this barrier, or you can say this binary, has created multiple forms of discrimination, and also it had multifarious impact on the position of women, whether it is in the private sphere or whether it is in the public sphere. Family dynamics are influenced by laws and policies, often privileging the interest of men and excluding marginalized groups such as same-sex couples or single women with responsibility. So, there is a very unitary and one way of seeing family, one way of understanding various types of relationship, and that has led to neglect of various other forms of relationship like the same sex marriage, or there may be instances of single woman, the responsibilities of her child. So, these instances are not considered to be normal, and the structure and the laws in the private sphere are dominated by all these gender biases, and they are tilted in favor of men. Feminists reject the idea that the distinction between public and private is natural, pointing out that its political construction, especially evident in reproductive policies where the state intervenes in family matters. So, here two different things. One is that they have rejected the idea that private and public dichotomy is natural, because most of the time and even now there are many people who believe that this dichotomy or this division of labor is very natural and it is essential for the functioning of the society, because there is a division of labor, proper division of labor, and it helps in maintaining balance and peace in the society. But this view has been rejected by the feminists because it is not natural, it is constructed, and there is very much involvement of politics in it because of the unequal power relation, because of the exploitation of women which is taking place in the private sphere, and also because of their inability to access public sphere on equal terms with men. And the second important thing is that why it is political, because we can see that state is intervening, has intervened in matters of reproductive issues. So, when state is making laws, therefore, it is no more non-political and it is very much political in nature. Then another very important problematic when we are discussing about the private public dichotomy, it is when the private barriers are getting broken and women are coming out and participating in the public sphere, then they are facing additional burden. In fact, they are facing the triple burden, and the triple burden consists of the domestic work, then is the reproductive work and the productive labor market. She has to go out and work, she has to share the burden of the public sphere along with her biological function of reproduction and also her domestic, which is the traditional responsibility she had to endure. She is actually triply burdened, and that has increased lots of pressure on the physical and mental health of women. The private sphere, including family dynamics, is inherently political, perpetuating male dominance and legitimizing various patriarchal activities like marital rape, which often goes unpunished, because it is considered very normal and there was no recognition of marital rape for a long period of time, and it was considered to be a non-existent issue in fact. But now slowly the countries across the world have recognized that this is also a form of abuse and violation of rights of the woman. Even within the marriage there can be rape. Demand for household restructuring to enable women's economic participation outside home. I think this is a very important point, because when we are talking about the private public restructuring, then we have to ensure that there is restructuring of work in the private sphere so that they can go out and they also participate in the public sphere on equal terms. The reason being that she has to share lots of domestic responsibilities at home, she also has to bear the biological or the reproductive responsibility of bearing the child and raising the child. These functions needs to be shared whether by men or by some other mechanism or institutions in the society, so that her burden is lessened and she can go out and participate on equal terms. Calculation of economic growth must include unpaid household labor. Now, this is another very important problem which has constituted, or it has been the concern of all feminist thinkers, and it is the question of unpaid labor which is performed by women in the domestic household. So, when we are calculating economic growth, only the growth in terms of GDP or the contribution made by people in the public sphere is taken into account. What about the indirect contribution made by women towards building the citizens of a country? What about the contributions made by women in terms of taking care of the domestic responsibilities when the men are going out and working or contributing towards GDP? They are also contributing in an indirect manner, which is also very valuable and very important in itself. So, when we are making calculation of economic growth, we have to recognize and understand the role and contribution made by women who are staying at home, and they are also contributing to economy. Now, the feminists acknowledge contemporary presence of women in public bodies, but male dominance persists. In the contemporary times, things have changed a lot. Now, we find that there is increasing presence of women in the public sphere across different spheres of life, whether in the field of education, in the field of law, or whether in the field of science. Everywhere we find the visibility of women. But still, the structures and the system and various processes are still not very favorable for the working of women. We find that there are lots of gender biases, and the work conditions are extremely unfavorable for women to work and perform on equal terms. Moreover, we find that women's presence are more in low status, low paid and unskilled jobs. We find the presence of women in a large number in the unorganized sector, who are most of the time having very low status, low paid, and also their job is contractual in nature, it is unskilled in nature. So, such type of jobs in which where women are placed, they are vulnerable to more exploitation, they are more exposed, and there are chances that they will be paid less in comparison to men in such work. Now, continuation of sexual division of labor in family and workplace. This is another very important challenge. In spite of so many laws and so many changes and transformation which has taken place in society and also at the state level, we find that this division of labor or this division of private public sphere is continuing in some form or other. Perhaps in some of the cases we find that it is getting more strengthened. So, it is continuing in the family sphere also, and we find that it is also visible in the workplace in various dimensions. So, this is another alarming thing. Laws regarding domestic violence and child abuse often overlook the mistreatment of girls within families. Though now we have laws on domestic violence and child abuse, but still there are multiple ways in which girls are being mistreated or misbehaved by the members of the family at their home. They are not being taken into account. Private public dichotomy justifies women's subordination both at the familial and societal levels, perpetuating their marginalization in economic and political domains. So, you know that what is happening at the domestic level, at the family level, it gets reflected in the political and economic level. If there is gender discrimination at the family level, then it is also getting manifested, or you can say its impact or its repercussion is manifested in the political and economic domain also. So, and that marginalization is perpetuated at the multifarious level for a long period of time, and even now we find that the presence of women or women leaders in politics is very low. Because if you see the percentage of women's population, which is almost half of the population, and we find the representation is still within the range of 10 to 15%. So, which is very low. So, therefore, we can find that in various fields of life, whether politics, even in the field of science and technology, we find that the presence of women is still low, and one of the important reason is that the marginalization that they suffer at the family level, that actually promotes their marginalization, or that prohibits them to make entry into this challenging and very active domain of life or of public sphere. Men's societal roles often limit women's advancement in the labor market, leading to barriers like glass ceiling and relegating women to the informal economy with temporary, part-time or casual jobs. So, that is what we have been talking about, that the type of work in which most of the women are engaged with, they are mostly temporary or part-time or contractual jobs, and therefore, they are facing glass ceiling at multiple levels, or you can say barriers at multiple levels, which they are finding it really very difficult to break down and come out in a new way to participate more actively in the economy or in the political lives. Now, feminists critiquing the distinction between public and private, they argue that the private is not free from the political influence of the public. Now, we know that there is continuous interaction going on between the private and the public sphere, because it is the men who again come back from the public sphere to the private sphere. So, the influences will automatically be there, and therefore, it is not possible, or if you say that there is no political influence, then I think this statement is wrong, because the private sphere is also getting politically influenced from the private sphere. Domain of civil society encompass both spheres with political power play. Now, we were talking about where we are going to place the civil society, whether it should be in the private sphere or whether it should be in the public sphere. So, the answer is that, or answer may be that, it encompasses or it includes both the sphere. So, that we have to understand that it encompasses both spheres with political power play. Overall argue for treating the two spheres as interdependent. So, this point we have stressed upon quite a number of times, that the public and private sphere, as the liberals have claimed to be separate, is not possible, because they are interdependent with each other. And I would like to give an example to illustrate that how the private sphere is now no more immune to the influences from the public sphere, by giving the example of how the social media is invading our private sphere, how we are increasingly posting our personal photographs, our household pictures on the social media. Sometimes we make a live recording or live display of what we are doing at our home, which was considered to be very private and which is a private sphere. But now this intrusion of mass media into our private sphere has eroded the boundaries or eroded the so called statement that the public sphere cannot influence the private sphere. Now, the boundaries between private and public sphere is getting eroded in the age of mass media, when everything is public, even our personal lives and personal activity have become public, and people are increasingly posting them on social media and others are watching them with great interest. Then to reject absolute separation and hierarchical ordering. The separation point is already taken, but also another very important point which accompanies the interdependence of the private and the public sphere is that we have to make it non-hierarchical. No sphere is above the other sphere, or in other words, public sphere has been traditionally considered to be more important and superior to private sphere, and therefore it has led to the non-recognition or devaluation of the woman's work at home. The woman's domestic work is also equally important in comparison to the work which is done by men in the political sphere, for example. They both are equally important, they both need to be placed on the equal footing or on the equal sphere, and they need to be recognized at the public level. The role which is played by women in the private sphere has to be recognized at the public level. So, therefore, equal significance and non-hierarchical ordering is essential. Then advocating for equal significance of private domestic realm is the point which I have been discussing just now. Now, let us come again to the slogan, that is, the personal is political. This slogan challenged the public private divide and the ambiguities which were associated with it, because earlier it was said that the personal is separate from the political, but this slogan changed everything when they say that there is nothing which is personal that is not political. Even the personal sometimes is more political than the political which we are talking in terms of the public sphere. It drew attention to the social acceptance of dualism in women's and men's life. Example, seeing matrimonial choice as a conscious social action, not destiny. Most of the time we say that the matrimonial choices or the marriages are made in heaven, but we have to relook at this way of understanding or seeing marriages. Marriages are not made in heaven, they are conscious social decisions which are made by two families after lots of deliberation and discussion. So, that we have to understand that even the marriage which is considered to be in the private sphere, that is also not free from all those deliberations and processes, including the interplay of power when the negotiations regarding marriage is taking place. We have to understand this. Then the second is personal structure through the public interventions like laws, policies, division of labor. We now know that because of the influence of this slogan and the call by the feminist to consider the various forms of exploitation taking place in the private sphere to be political and build laws against it, various important laws on rape, abortion, inheritance, child care, welfare benefits have been formulated. So, therefore, we can say that the personal structured through public interventions have taken place in the recent years to the formulation of various laws, through the formulation adoption of various programs. Now, radical extend the critique of patriarchy within personal life to include biological, psychological and linguistic perspective. For some radicals, male power in the personal realm was identified universally and ahistorically across culture in practices such as sati, foot binding, rape, then pornography, genital mutilation, witch burning and even male dominated gynecology. Now, these are some of the practices which are prevalent across the world. Genital mutilation is prevalent in the African society. The practice of sati, where the married woman was burnt on the dead body of her husband, funeral pyre, was very much in practice even few years back, which was finally abolished by making law. So, these practices, extreme practices, were prevalent not only in India, but across the world. We have the example of witch burning, which were very much practiced in the various European countries. Then, in the present time, we have the problem of pornography and how women are portrayed there. What type of violent and objectification of women takes place in such programs is a well known fact. So, therefore, this exercise of power is manifest across multiple dimensions in the personal sphere, but also in the public sphere across the world. So, it is said that it is universal and ahistorical, crossing across history, crossing across boundary or temporal limitations. Mary Daly saw these universal male sadomasochistic rituals designed to discipline and subdue women. They argued that masculinist themes, especially binary opposition such as public and private, often dominate and discipline both discourses and the construction of the body and self. That these type of patriarchal or the masculinistic discourse, they have dominated every sphere of our life, both the discourses and the construction of the body and self, and how they have in a way, in a systematic and consistent manner, they have subdued and dominated women. So, at the last, we can conclude that the ongoing debate revolved around the relevance and boundaries of public and private realm. So, there are two things which are being discussed and debated. First is what should be the boundary of the public and the private sphere, and second, what should be its relevance. Some advocate for the dissolution of distinction, while others caution against eroding privacy entirely. Some say that we must completely dissolve, and especially in the age of social media, we find that those distinctions are eroding automatically. And some, they argue that no, we should have certain amount of privacy. They are essential for preservation of individual autonomy and freedom, for which we have fought for so many years. That autonomy is now being intruded upon or snatched upon because of the invasion of social media. So, we have to be cautious about that. Then the third is feminist interventions have led to broader social transformation and legal recognition of private concern. So, naturally there is no doubt that by challenging the private public distinction, feminists could achieve various important milestones in terms of building of laws, in terms of developing various programs, and also making the society aware about the causes of oppression and exploitation, and helping in bringing about at the end transformation and change in the society. So, their interventions have been extremely useful when we talk in terms of the debates surrounding the private public dichotomy. So, at the end of this lecture, I come to at the last with some of the questions like, are the boundaries between public and private, is it negotiable? Can we negotiate? Is there any possibility of drawing or redrawing the boundary lines between the private and the public sphere? Second, does the differentiation between public and private sphere contribute to oppression of women? What are the liberal perspectives dealing with state intervention for causes of social justice? So, with this, I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.